Ryan Day, for a long time, has been one of the most hotly debated coaches in college football. People who have defended him in largely the same way. You look at his resume and you say, okay, he's recruited very well. He has a very good overall record. And while he struggles in the big games and the big moments that really define who he is as a coach, a lot of those games have been super close. They've been within one score, and he's had a couple of breaks that have maybe cost him a national championship or a game against Michigan. If you keep holding out, eventually games like that will start breaking Ryan Day's way, and when they do, everything will be all right. Basically, Ryan Day is a good coach, but he's just been unlucky in some close games. But his loss to Michigan this last week, 13-10, has made it a lot tougher for me to hear that argument and take it seriously. Because while yes, this was another close loss in a big moment, it shouldn't have even been close to begin with. OSU should have gone in and won that game by 20 points. And even if they had made one more big play and barely won that game, it still would have been a disappointment, and it still would have been an illustration about how Ryan Day is underachieving as a coach at OSU. And it seems like a lot of people agree. They think that loss was the final straw, and they're no longer willing to just blame luck for Ryan Day's shortcomings. However, a shocking number of fans are still making that case, and a shocking number of serious Ohio State media personalities or just overall national media personalities in the college football world still back him with the reasoning that he's just gotten bad breaks and what can you do? So I want to talk today a little bit about why I'm so frustrated with people just blaming luck for everything that's happened to OSU over the last half decade. Now, I want to start off by saying there is some logic or some truth to thinking that things could start to break for Ohio State more than they are now. And I think in football, it is totally fair to say that one-score games are pretty fickle. Some years you're going to get them to break for you. Other years you're going to get them to break against you. There's a lot of luck involved. I can think off the top of my head, like the New York Giants had one year where they won like every single one-score game that they played, or they went like 9-1 in one-score games. That made their season really good and made everybody's perspective on who they were as a team really high. But they never could repeat that amount of one-score game luck, and they haven't been good since. It's not crazy to expect the opposite to happen to you some years. Take, for example, arguably their most controversial, could have changed the narrative game, 2022 against Georgia. They lost that game in the dying seconds off of a missed field goal, and if they had won it, they would have not only gone to the national title, but they would have lined up against TCU, a team they were heavily favored against. So a lot of people say if they had made that one kick, they would have won the national title, and the conversation around Ryan Day would be completely different. And here's the thing, I don't disagree. If they hit that kick, I think they do go on to beat TCU, although I don't think they hold them to 3 points like Georgia did. But what I don't agree with is this idea that there was no other possible ending to that game other than attempting a 50-yard field goal and hoping for the best. There's a million different ways that Ohio State could have ended that game. They could have decided not to be passive once they got into field goal range and continued to drive down the field. Remember, they had 2 timeouts and like 30 seconds left and decided to run the ball once they got down to UGA's 30. It didn't work. The drive didn't go anywhere after that, and they settled for a 50-yarder, a kick you'd expect the kicker not to make at the college level. Or Ryan Day could have spent the first 3 years of his tenure at OSU putting together a defense that wouldn't give up 42 points in a big game like that and require the offense to go down on a final drive and get more than 41 to cash in the win. I'll admit that OSU had some bad breaks, maybe some penalties that didn't go their way, and having Jason and Marv out for that final drive, absolutely crushing. But you're never going to play a game like that against a great team where you don't get some calls that go against you or you don't have any injuries. And UGA in that game can also say they had some calls that went against them. I've heard a lot of their fans talk about how they felt like they didn't get the holding calls that they deserved, and they also had a bunch of injuries in that game as well. That's obviously just one example, but I think it applies to pretty much every close game that they've played. You can look at it and say, oh, if this play had gone differently for them, if this ball had bounced a different way, they could have come out on top. Sure, but that doesn't relieve Ohio State of all responsibility to go out and win a tough game, even if it is against a really good opponent like Georgia. However, that's only one part of the equation here, and I think what's more frustrating about the argument that Ryan Day is just getting bad breaks and so unlucky is that none of those people who will tell you that ever look at it from the other side. Those people will never say, oh, yeah, well, we lost some one-score games, sure, but you know what? We also won some one-score games, and we actually got some things to break our way to get those wins. Do you know what his record is in games decided by 8 points or less? It's 6-6. I totally understand that the games that he's losing by one score are like the way more important ones. If he lost to Nebraska this year, which was a game decided by 4 points, but he beat Michigan, they'd be in the playoffs, and yeah, they might not be playing in the Big Ten championship game, but people would be a lot calmer than they are right now. But regardless, it kills me to hear people say, well, if a couple of things went differently in the Oregon and Michigan game in 2024, OSU would be 12-0 and playing in the Big Ten championship game, and you'd think about Ryan Day and how they had played this season entirely differently. But they never suggest, to be fair, if a couple of things went differently in the Nebraska and the Penn State game, they could be 8-4, and I would think about Ryan Day completely differently. Basically, what they're doing is selectively deciding when to take luck into account. And by doing so, they're asking you to imagine a hypothetical Ryan Day who, I guess, never loses one-score games, and then they'll tell you, oh, if that was the case, you would think so much more highly of him, wouldn't you? And it's like, yeah, I would. But that's not a real coach. That's not a real person. And honestly, you go back and look at the last couple of seasons for the Buckeyes, and it's not all been things going against them. Like in 2023, they played a huge game against Notre Dame. That one came down to the wire. But on the final play where everything was going to be decided in that one moment with 1 second on the clock, Notre Dame didn't even put out 11 defenders, and the Buckeyes won by inching their way into the end zone. That was a fantastic break. That easily could have gone the other way. And in 2022, like we just talked about, I know that people say the in-game stuff didn't go for them, but I'd argue that they were given a golden opportunity that year that they didn't really earn. I mean, it was a 4-team playoff. They went 11-0 going into the Michigan game, lost that, didn't make the Big Ten championship game, and then got placed in the playoffs with a national title game that was a gimme, so they were basically playing in the pseudo-national championship. An opportunity that good by just changes in college football will never happen to you again, and they didn't make good on it. That's why it makes me so mad when people say, oh, well, they were close to a national title, and if it wasn't for the bad breaks, they'd have it. Dude, they were close to a national title, and if it wasn't for the good breaks, they probably wouldn't have been. If the field was stronger, they wouldn't have even made the playoffs. So I guess my 2 points are, I think these games that are close are not as much luck as some people want to let on, and I think people are only considering the things that go against them and not the things that go for them. And I think part of the reason why they only consider the things that go against them is because Ohio State keeps losing. If Ohio State were winning national titles, if Ohio State were beating Michigan, we would be talking about everything that went right, everything that made these great moments happen. Look at the Chiefs, for instance. They're fantastic. Everybody talks about how lucky they are because they keep winning. If they kept losing, we'd all talk about their unlucky moments. Same thing is true for the Patriots when they were a dynasty before them. We talked about everything that went their way because they kept winning. And with Ohio State, we talk about everything that goes against them because Ryan Day allows to be the conversation around everything that goes against them because they're not getting the victories that they need to. Now, I'm recording all of this 2 weeks before the playoffs start, and the playoffs would be a fantastic opportunity for Ryan Day to win some of the fan base back here with some good performances. Even if they didn't win the national title, if they could go on a little bit of a run and win some big-time games, I think it could calm a lot of people's nerves. And I'm not going to sit here and tell you I know how those games are going to go, although I'm not feeling great about them considering how this most recent Michigan game was, I think, the worst game they've played under Ryan Day in the last half decade. But here's what I will tell you. If things start to break Ohio State's way, it's not going to be because they magically get luckier and the coin flips start breaking their way. It'll be because of tangible improvements that we've needed to see out of this coaching staff for a long time. It'll be because they got more aggressive. They leaned on the receivers more when they needed to. They were more cutthroat with position coaches who weren't cutting it. They were stronger in the trenches when they needed to be. And their clock management overall was better as a whole because against Michigan down the stretch, it was really rough. There's nothing stopping Ryan Day from improving those things. And if he does, great. I'll be the first person to say those things are getting better and the results are getting better because of it. But improvements like that are the only thing that can save Ryan Day. And I think fans really questioning whether or not he can make those changes after we've known they've been a problem for a long time and nothing's been done doesn't surprise me at all and isn't unreasonable. I appreciate y'all sticking all the way through the video. Sorry this is a whiny one. I'm a whiny guy, and it's easy to whine about Ohio State. I will say, I won't lie, I do kind of feel bad for Ryan Day. He seems like a perfectly nice guy, and being the Ohio State head coach, I honestly think might be the second most stressful job in America behind being the president. Like, I would take being the vice president from a stress standpoint over being the head coach of OSU, right? And I think there's a balance between criticizing him fairly and being too much of a jerk, even if 4 losses in a row to Michigan is about as bad as it gets. But thank you all for tuning in. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe, hit the bell. That's the classic. And I'll catch y'all next time.